Hello and welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns podcast for March 14th, 2025. My name is Tom Luongo and we have a lot to talk about. It is episode 209 and I do have the very great pleasure of finally getting the chance to sit down and have a long form one-on-one conversation with Martin Armstrong of Princeton Economics. Martin needs really no introduction into all of this. And I've been, just to give everybody a background on this, I've been reading Martin's work since the Jim Sinclair days. I mean, this goes back. This is part of my long-term education, and I can tell you that I didn't understand a word of it at the time, and it took me probably 10 years of diligent study and fighting it and everything else in order for me to eventually begin to get a handle on what Martin was writing about when he was in prison and when Jim was republishing his work on the old JMS Mindset blog, which it was incredibly important. And I miss Jim. I used to email him all the time. It's one of those things. So this is a big deal for me. So Martin, thank you very much for taking the time this afternoon to come on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
All right. So with that said, we have a new prime minister in Canada, and I had him described to me yesterday by Sean Newman, our mutual friend Sean Newman, as the Dark Lord of finance. And I find it really interesting that in a world where we're supposed to be defending democracy at every turn, there is no democratic anything anywhere other than kind of in the United States, and only when it's overwhelmingly in one direction versus the other. And in the case of the November election, what do you take? Let's just start there. What do you think of this movement by putting Mark Carney in, and what are the ramifications of that?
Well, that was pretty much, I think, a foregone conclusion. Um, what people need to know is that he was actually there in Edinburgh, with the whole net zero. He's one of the guys that came up with this. He's also one of the guys that was behind the scenes formulating the Build Back Better stuff. And if you look at what he ran on, he was actually running against Trudeau, repealing this, that, capital gains, etc. All right. He is clearly a globalist. There's no question about that. And what he has done is very clever. And when governments are in trouble, and this goes back historically, you can search or whatever, they always try to find an external enemy. This country's, invaded us, this, that, whatever. It's always that sort of thing. What he's done is he's basically abandoned all discussion of the economy or anything along those lines. And it's all Trump, Trump, Trump. And what he has done is tapped into this emotional outrage against Trump in Canada. And if this continues, I feel bad for Canada because nothing's going to change and it's going to get a lot worse. But speaking to Canadians, those that actually have a mind of their own have written me that they're sick and tired of their parliamentary system, that they don't get to vote for these people. And it's always a club. And they don't get to vote for a president. They would like to see at least a constitutional change to adopt something more like the United States, where they get to decide who the hell is running the country. The other thing that I really have found is that many are who, again, they have a brain so they think for themselves, are saying, pretty much thank you, Trump, mainly because what's coming out in Canada, which a lot of people had no clue of, including Canadians, that there were tariffs between provinces. And so suddenly they began to see, what Trump was talking about, they had never even heard about. and the then they're very upset with mainly the tariffs out of, for example, Quebec, where Quebec initially, oh, we're going to put a 25% tariff on electricity, and then immediately had it back down. Why? Because largely the farmers there have pretty much a 250% tariff on U.S. products coming in. They're one of the strongest groups there in Europe. And friends of mine in Vancouver says there's no way to dislodge them. They just got too much money and they're running the government. So it's Canada is going to be very interesting to see how this develops. But I wouldn't expect anything other than I would expect the election probably to be rigged one way or another. What's going on is that they need the left agenda, and that includes like the guys with NATO and etc. And if you look at Germany, the Greens have made the front pages. They're pro-war. Why? Oh, they want to invade and destroy Russia because they're the biggest fossil fuel producer. I mean, you have to look. I guess back in the mid 19th century, the Democrats were the slave owners. Then they flipped to 100% and become socialists, and we care. It's so people change their positions over periods of time, and I don't know how you get from one point to the other that's 180 degrees out of whack. But they rigged the Romanian elections mainly because the EU and NATO was building the largest military base in all of Europe in Romania. So it was like, there's no way we can allow, this guy to come in and stop it. So then after he wins, the prosecutors come out, oh, well, he's under investigation, Russian interference, but no explanation as to what, no anything. Then they just say, okay, well, you're banned from even running. I mean, you talk about you don't even know what the claim of Russian interference is. So, I mean, this is starting into civil unrest there in Romania, and it's going to percolate a lot more. And you're seeing the same stuff just about everywhere. I mean, AFD was rising. Oh, they're the far right. Well, they came in second. And then normally a coalition government is the two top parties. Here they completely circumvented the AFD and went to the minorities. They can't allow anybody who is going to be against NATO or the EU. And you're going to see this largely from Canada. I mean, what is Carney saying? I mean, basically he's saying resistance against Trump. Well, okay, what is that? That's just tariffs. What are you going to do? So you're going to put on more tariffs? There is no coherent strategy that I can see out of this. And the central bank has symbolically said, okay, we're selling off U.S. treasuries.
Right.
But then they're issuing Canadian debt denominated in U.S. dollars.
I want to get into that. That's a really important point, because when I was not surprised that Carney, when I saw his name move into the mix against Chrystia Freeland to take over from Justin Trudeau, I'm like, oh no, Carney's been chosen. He's going to be Prime Minister of Canada, even if it's just temporary, and then we'll see what happens with the general election, which he has to call in the next few months. But right on the heels of that, within 24 hours, he announces that he's going to issue US dollar denominated Canadian debt. Now, when you think about that, like, what does that mean? I'm like, well, yesterday when I was thinking about it and I was doing the report that I do for my patrons every Wednesday, I'm like, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't we in this moment in time? This has been my thesis for 3 years now about the United States having their own debt indexing rate, SOFR. We've moved away from LIBOR, we've moved over to SOFR, which means that the American repo markets and the American domestic banking system sets the price of dollars effectively worldwide at the margin because of SOFR, because LIBOR is gone. Well, the Canadians run a $10 billion a month trade surplus with the United States. It's $124 billion last year. $10 billion a month, that buys an awful lot of coupon payments in US dollar denominated Canadian dollar debt. With the central bank cutting harder now, they cut to 2.75% yesterday. This to me just looks like an end run around SOFR, that they just want to turn Canada into the world's biggest shadow bank to flood the system with $0, where the United States has worked so hard over the last 3 years to dry up the offshore dollar market, and which is why Europe is screaming and why Europe is in serious trouble and why they're now threatening to bail in everybody's savings and everything else that you can see happening right now. Their system is teetering because the United States said, no, if you want dollars, you got to pay 5.5% for them. Up now 4.5%, but you understand what I mean. And there's Canada at 2.75. Who would buy those bonds at 2.75 when the United States is selling them at 4%? Only people who really need dollars. What do you? This is where I'm going with this, and why they would bring in someone like Mark Carney, because they know Trump would putting tariffs on, and now changing the balance of trade between Canada and the United States. And I think there's something to be said about this. This is where my head has been for the last 24 hours, and I'm gonna drop it on you, Martin, and see if you can run with it.
Well, typically, if you look at all the emerging markets,
right,
they issue debt in dollars. Why?
Yes,
because they have to sell it to raise money in New York. Mm-hmm. And New York's not interested in buying, foreign debt in various different currencies. There's too much FX risk.
Right.
So they issue it in dollars, and then they take the foreign exchange risk back themselves. Mm-hmm. So I suspect that, first of all, he's not going to be able to sell Canadian debt denominated in U.S. dollars at theoretically almost half the U.S. rate. So I think what they're doing is basically they have a real serious debt problem. Mm-hmm. And if they go into this complete trade war, then how do they sell their debt? A lot of debt has to be sold internationally. Right. And the big money center banks are in New York. So it seems to me that they're doing the same thing as some of these emerging markets. They're saying one game, but playing it a different way. Selling off the U.S. debt, okay, that's retaliation against Trump. However, can they really sell the equivalent in Canadian?
Certainly not at 150 basis points less than the United States, right?
Exactly. And with trade wars coming, I mean, our computer is not very optimistic about the Canadian economy going forward. So that would mean they would have even more of a difficult time, right, if they were issuing more debt in Canadian dollars. The market's going to move it up.
Right.
A lot of people don't understand that central banks can only fix this short-term rate, not the long-term.
Right.
The long-term is set by the market.
Yes.
That's what quantitative easing really was about. The Fed could not affect the long-term interest rate, which were the mortgage-backed securities and et cetera. So they were starting to buy in the 30-year bonds, treasuries, in theory, to reduce the supply to bring down the long-term rate because they have no way of doing it directly. Um, so I suspect this is what you're really seeing, that they cannot, all right, you have a debt problem. Now, for political purposes, you're selling off U.S. debt.
Yes.
So, okay, fine. You're taking that cash back in. That's not going to really help your balance sheet that much. So what are you doing? Issuing Canadian debt, but denominated in dollars. So it seems as though they're trying to make it so that their debt can be sold, but in dollar denominations. So the market is going to raise that. I don't care what they think. They're not going to be able to sell it at 2.7 if it's 4.5 for treasuries. The market won't buy it unless it pays that higher rate, which I think you're going to see develop.
Right.
And you're largely, it was, the whole problem with the euro. They were telling everybody, oh, everybody's going to pay the same rate, blah, 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 all that stuff. And I said, no, it's not going to happen. All right. Mainly because Cole didn't want to consolidate the debts because he didn't allow the German people to vote on joining the euro. So his concession was, I'll join the euro, but no consolidation of the debt. And I warned them. I mean, we had meetings in this back in 98. I said, look, a simple trader knows this is not going to work. We have 50 states in the U.S., single currency, but everybody pays different rates. I said, that's what's going to happen in Europe. So as you know, I mean, people just trade the spreads between them now. Right. It's as if they were currency. Nothing really changed that way.
Right.
So again, that's what I think. The selling off of U.S. treasuries is a political move because of Trump. But then issuing the Canadian dollar debt in U.S. dollars is to compensate. Because they get into, and what is Carney basically saying? He's, basically that we have to resist Trump. Okay, how do you do that? Just raise tariffs?
Like the entire Eastern economy and the Ontario economy is centered around the auto industry, selling cars made in Canada back into the United States. The Western Canadian economy is where the wealth of Canada is. And I was talking to Tracy Schuchart. I had her on the podcast a few weeks ago, and she was reminding me, she's like, dude, Western Canadian Select is trading at $25 a barrel because they can't sell it. Because there's no way to sell it overseas. They have to sell it to the United States. It's a captured market. So they're starving up in Edmonton. You got the Edmontonians and the Albertans are livid as to what's going on. And Trump has all the cards here. It's the same thing I'm here to tell Mark Carney the same thing that Trump told Zelensky. You don't have any cards. Because I mean, $10 billion a month in a trade surplus can go away very quickly if we can crush that out of existence with tariffs, and there's nothing you can do about it. And we don't have to play nice about this. So
them and Europe, they still cling to these old Marxist ideas that we protect jobs with high tariffs. And I mean, when I testified before the House Ways and Means Committee on this whole issue, I said, look, companies, and I've advised them, I've set up where to go, things of that nature. I said, this is not a question, gee, I'm paying this guy $2 an hour instead of 10. That's not the issue. The issue is that we tax worldwide income. And so then an American company bidding like on the Yellow River Dam for construction in China didn't get anything because the Germans do, because they don't pay taxes on worldwide income.
Right.
They're already 35% cheaper. Right. And it's like, I said, just look at the history. when you started taxing worldwide income and then raised it dramatically, they left. It's got nothing to do with, but they always want to put it in this Marxist thing. Oh, they went there because of cheap labor. Not true. I mean, I became friends with Margaret Thatcher because I was restructuring Japanese companies to get into Europe. Mm-hmm. And I was putting all the ones that needed skilled labor, the auto manufacturers, et cetera, in Britain. And she wanted to know, why am I doing this? I said, if I put them in Germany, all the regulations, social benefits, et cetera, on top of the wages is 40% more in Germany versus Britain.
Right.
She wasn't aware of that. So it's not just the wage you're paying somebody. There's a lot more complicated in this. Yes. And these Marxists, I mean, these are throwbacks largely to the 19th century. You have all these provinces and everybody's got tariffs against everybody else, as if they're all independent countries there in Canada.
Right.
I mean, that's illegal in the United States. The Constitution outlawed that.
It's the Constitution's. It's one of the Constitution's superpowers, actually. When you start to look at, there are many things about the Constitution we can argue with, but that's one of the things that is its strongest suit, is that there cannot be reciprocal tariffs or free movement. Basically, we've always had a Schengen zone here in the United States. You can move freely labor can move freely across state borders and all the rest of it, and that was absolutely. The hardcore libertarians would call it tyrannical. And I would say, well, that's nice, but it's what helped build the United States. It's helped build the commercial banking industry, which built, the greatest economy the world ever saw. So,
Well, for example, in Canada, if you're a lawyer in Nova Scotia, you cannot practice in Newfoundland. Whereas if you are recognized in New York in a federal court, you can practice law in a federal court anywhere in the country.
Right.
It's just, it's those sorts of things that is so restrictive in Canada. And that's why I say there are a lot of Canadians I speak to, they're saying, we should send a thank you card to Trump because we didn't know about this.
Not only do we not know about it, now we have to figure out how to get rid of it. It's interesting that you say that there's a movement away from parliamentary elections in Canada. This is something I hadn't had a chance to even bring up to my Canadian friends and listeners yet. But it's a very important thing if they're tired of it. And again, well, I mean, I'll be honest with you, Martin, when you start to think about it, whenever you ruin a market, right, for anything, the market, the action goes somewhere else, right? So if you destroy the liquidity through volatility and spoofing and everything else, and say the Brent crude contract, which they've been doing now for 3 years, eventually the traders, the real traders, will move to a different market where there's not the shenanigans. The volume will just go somewhere else and trade over there. Well, it's the same thing with kind of political systems. If you make a mockery of quote unquote democracy and the people's will through parliamentary systems, eventually the people are going to go, I don't want these parliamentary systems anymore, and they're going to there will no longer be a bull market in European style parliamentary systems, and we'll move towards a different system, and possibly towards one like the United States. Not that I'm a huge fan of our system either,
EU.
Right? The EU is terrible.
Ursula doesn't stand for election. Nobody in the commission stands for an election. People that make the laws do not stand for it. It is so anti-democratic. It's crazy. But
yet these are the shining defenders of democracy against the evil poodler. And it defies description how comical and comical is, I think, the best word for it.
Yeah, I mean, they call Putin a dictator who at least stood for election, and they never do.
Right, and when you listen to Putin talk about democracy in Russia, he's very open about it. He says, "Look, we haven't been doing it very long. We're not particularly good at it, but we're trying. And with each election cycle, we get better. And the last time, I remind everybody that the last time, they had political reform in Russia, Putin devolved powers out of the presidency towards the Duma and towards the Security Council. And he offloaded some of the president's responsibilities and power as opposed to arrogating more power to himself. So who's moving in the right direction here? And, who's really the bad guy in that respect?
Well, I can tell you that the view in Russia, looking at the West, is that Russia does tend to be much more holding to Christian values than in the West. And their criticism of the West is that we became very anti-Christian, anti-God, with the whole woke movement, the transgender and stuff like this. But and I mean that kind of came up with Bernie Sanders, his tour against oligarchs, and then having basically a transgender singer using every explicit language against God is worthless, basically. It's like our computer projects that the Democratic Party will collapse. It's most likely going to split. The same as the Federalists. That happened to the Federalists before. Any political party that seeks to impose like a dictatorial power over a centralized government, it fails. You can't make this one size fits all. And so like you had Camilla, somebody was one of her rallies and talking about abortion and God, and her response was, "You're at the wrong rally." So in other words, the people in the Midwest, which are the Bible Belt, they're basically saying, "We don't care about you. Take your religion and stuff it." This is what Zelensky's doing to the Donbass. He's outlawed their religion and their language. And in Canada, I was on a podcast recently, and I said, "Look, if Canada did that to the French, outlawed French, I think you'd have a revolution there too." I mean, you can't do certain things like this. It's if you don't respect the people, their religion, and their language. I don't care what government you're looking at; it's not going to survive.
No, it's not. No, it's clearly the case, and we have, when I look at Europe, I refuse to even call it the EU anymore. It's the EU SSR as far as I'm concerned. I think it's a actually better version of the USSR than, in terms of being a technocratic nightmare, an unelected technocratic nightmare, than even the Soviet Politburo was. And they're making no bones about it at this point. We don't stand for elections. We aren't. If you vote the wrong way, you will be marginalized, as you pointed out about Romania and anybody who doesn't toe the line. I mean, they were the day after Viktor Orban blew up the latest push for more aid to Ukraine in the European Council, which is the foreign, for those who don't know, the European Council is the foreign policy where all the heads of state, that's the council where all the heads of state, they each have an equal vote, and it has to be unanimous. And everybody has a veto on the European Council. And Orban blew up the thing and said, "No, I'm not voting for this." And the very next day they started to procedures in the European Parliament to strip Hungary of its voting rights. This is the enemy, folks. This is the enemy of humanity. Now they want to, and Christine Lagarde came out the other day and said, we're going to roll out the digital euro. At the same time, they all were singing the praises of their new, savings and investment, SIU, savings investment, thing.
I mean, this is one of the reasons that gold is fleeing Europe and coming to America.
Yes.
They're expecting capital controls. And I've warned all my clients, just their history. World War One, what happened? They immediately shut down all the stock markets.
Mhm.
They're afraid of money leaving. So I said, if you don't get the hell out of there now, when that first bullet is shot, you're not getting out.
Mhm.
And then you have them pushing for this digital currency. And look, the whole object, uh, Americans don't, I think, understand because our currency's never been canceled.
Right.
But in Europe, they routinely cancel currency.
Mhm.
And it's part of the Marxist agenda so that you can't have 500,000 in cash that you stuffed in a safety deposit box because it expires and you're forced to come out, turn it in. Oh, where'd this come from? Did you pay taxes on this? This is how it's done. I mean, I would always keep some currency, different currency, different countries in my wallet because I'll be traveling around. Then you go there. Oh, that's expired now. Okay, fine. Oh, if you want, no, I can't exchange it. Uh, you have to go back to the central bank to do that. And okay, fine. I mean, I had even gone behind the Berlin Wall before it fell, and they forced you to buy East German marks at 1-to-1 with the West.
Right.
Then you got in town, and nobody would take the East. So
Right.
I'm leaving, and I got the same amount of East German marks that I was forced to buy when I went in. And this woman pulls this bell and yells, "Marks!" They come take me by the arm, bring me all the way back to the beginning of Checkpoint Charlie. They confiscate the money, and I'm sitting there waiting. And I said, "Look, can I have do this? I have to sit here for a long time." Oh, uh, here's your receipt. You can stay the night and go to the central bank and they'll exchange it for you there. We only confiscate here. And I said, oh, and you people say you're not capitalists. Huh? Thank you. Can I just leave?
Yeah.
Keep the money?
Yeah, exactly. It would be cheaper.
This is they cancel currency routinely. India canceled currency. Canada has canceled all the high denomination currency notes. Here in America, Americans have never had that. If you have a bill, a $5 bill from 1861 is still legal tender. I mean, It's worth a hell of a lot more than $5, but in theory, you can still spend it. You can go online and you can buy, they used to issue $1,000 bills and $500 bills and up till 1934. They carry premiums now because they don't issue them anymore. But I mean, there was even a $10,000 bill they used to print.
Right.
So once FDR came in, he started eliminating that high denomination. Why? So you can't have cash and stuffing it in your pocket someplace. We want the taxes. So now we have the highest denomination is $100 bill. Right. And even have people like Larry Summers saying that should be canceled.
Well, of course. Well, again, they want to move us all into a digital system that has 100% surveillance and everything else. That's the European model. They've been trying to push that onto the United States. And I don't think it's going to happen. I would be shocked if it does. I know Jerome Powell has no desire to implement any kind of central bank digital currency.
I have been behind the curtain on that issue.
Okay.
And the real issue is that the Federal Reserve cannot do it because if they were to look into your account, they would require a search warrant. So what they're doing is, the idea was let the banks create it. It's more or less like the COVID model.
Right.
The Federal Reserve can't look in your account. And on the First Amendment, the government shall not restrict your speech. YouTube can, Facebook, they're not the government. So the private sector, your constitutional rights, so to speak, are really negative against the government.
Yeah.
It's not a positive right of yours,
Right.
and that's a misnomer. So you have no right to free speech. It's the government has no right to restrain it.
Yes.
Everybody else can. So it's important to understand you have no rights.
No.
These
Oh,
are all
free.
negative restraints upon government.
Right.
The
You know,
government shall not.
right. The ultimately at the end of the day, freedom of association is freedom from association, and
Yes.
we should understand that. Not to say that this, and again, I don't have a problem with that philosophically because there are good there's good and bad in that. What we found, of course, is that all these companies, certainly the banks, which are all chartered by the government anyway, so they're really quasi governmental institutions at a certain level like that, and then the social media companies and the rest of it, like they're all in bed. And then we find out they're all in bed with the government and the intelligence agencies
Yeah.
anyway. So it's all legal dodge to do exactly what they want to do. That has to be broken down, and we have to understand that that's what they're doing, and then say no, we're not going to do that, and no, we're not going to live under that rubric. So tying both Europe and Canada together clear to me that we have entered into a different world since the Trump Zelensky meeting at the White House. That something has fundamentally broken. That there's been a kind of Rene Girard would describe it as a mimetic collapse. We we took the red pill and all of a sudden it's a different world than we had before. We finally saw something. We saw the people for who they were. The mask slipped, however you want to put it. Toto's chewing on the leg of the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. That I think is a moment we're at now, and it's really revealed, I think, a seething and deep-seated animosity between Americans and Canadians, and between Europeans and Americans that was always there, but we kind of laughed off. And now that it's real, because they have an agenda at the leadership level that we're refusing to go along with, and we're daring to say we want to be independent of this operation in Ukraine for whatever reason. I don't know. That's my read on this. What do you see? What are you seeing on that, Marty? Do you agree with it or not?
Yes. Look, Europe is it's really an economic basket case. It's you had these crazy people first doing the COVID and shutting things down. Then you had the climate change, and then on top of that, they put sanctions on against Russia, raising their energy costs. The German economy has shrunk at least 3%, and possibly as much as 5%. We don't know fully yet, maybe more, because you put so many small businesses out, and that's it. So if you look at the growth rate of the GDP of Germany, which is supposed to be the cornerstone of Europe, it looks like death warmed over.
Right.
So Europe is collapsing. And what you have is, I did a report on it. I decided I would, let it all out. The heck with it. There are declassified documents that clearly established that the whole European Union was created by the CIA, and the obstacle was France. It was de Gaulle.
Right.
He hated the Germans, he hated the Americans, and he hated the British. My father happened to have been with Patton from North Africa right up to Berlin. And I remember him telling me the parade in Paris for liberating Paris, de Gaulle insisted that he would be at the front of it when he really didn't do anything.
Right.
And so what they did was they threatened to cut off the Marshall aid. And he finally relented, and he agreed to establishing the European community, allowing Germany in, but he would not accept the British.
Hmm.
So the British, if you look at it, they were not allowed to join the EU until after de Gaulle died. Um, so they were doing this because they wanted a unified front against communist Russia at the time.
Sure.
That was the motivation of the CIA. Consequently, NATO is just a retirement home for neocons.
Hmm.
Um, and I've seen the internal stuff. I mean, they were concerned that all this money was going to climate change. So what they did was like internal memos. How do we remain relevant? Uh, they're afraid of getting shut down, getting, losing money, etc. Trump's the first term up there talking about leaving NATO.
Right.
And so they needed to beat the war drums. And putting out this propaganda that, if Ukraine falls, Europe will be next. I mean, it's so absurd. It's beyond laughable.
It is.
And there was an attempted regime change back in 2000. They wanted Yeltsin to not run, and they wanted to stick in their puppet Baryshnovsky.
Hmm.
And so they got Yeltsin to steer $7 billion, take money from the IMF loans of $7 billion, steered it through basically a fake refurbishment, a real estate company in Geneva, who nobody ever heard of. And then as soon as that wire took place, they steered it through Bank of New York. Republic National Bank ran to the feds and say, oh, Bank of New York just did a $7 billion money laundering. So they run into the Bank of New York. And then they use that to blackmail Yeltsin. You will not run for election in 2000. This was the summer of 99. And if you do, all this is going to come out. So what happened was the communists in Russia then filed an impeachment motion against Yeltsin. He then had the Americans and the bankers threatening him on the other side. That's how Putin came in.
Yep.
He turned to Putin, who wasn't an oligarch and wasn't basically a communist. So, and his last words were, protect Russia. That's why Putin had such an approval rating in the 70%, because the people there knew they did not want to go back to communism, and they didn't want, more of this oligarch stuff.
Right.
So this is why they hate Putin so much, because he basically stopped their takeover.
Yep.
And what I find really distasteful is every newspaper you pick up, Putin invaded Ukraine unprovoked. All you have to do is just Google it, and you'll see it's exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
Zelensky stood up the day before and said Ukraine was going to rearm nuclear.
Yep.
And 2 days before that, you had Camilla reading her cue cards from the neocons. Oh, Ukraine should join NATO.
Yep.
And they were, when there was the revolution in 2014, you can see the video on my site. That I think it's been taken off of YouTube now, but I had the original video of McCain standing on the stage in Maidan, saying, overthrow your government, U.S. is with you. And I can't imagine if China stood on the steps of Congress and say, overthrow your government, we're with you.
Right. How long that would last.
I mean, once they overthrew the government, and Oliver Stone did a great documentary, Ukraine on Fire, I suggest watching. That was all rigged. And then Victoria Nuland the tape even came out about them picking who was going to be running the government. And then they told the unelected government to attack the Donbass and start the civil war, to bring Russia in. And I mean, then you had, a supposed peace agreement. Putin withdrew his tanks and everything from the outside of Kiev. And it was to be the Minsk agreement. And then you had Angela Merkel of Germany, stand up when this war started with Zelensky, and people asked her, well, what about the Minsk agreement? Germany and France certified that. And she actually said to the public, and you can Google this up, oh, well, we really didn't intend to honor that. We were just buying time for Ukraine to build an army.
I know.
I mean,
and when Merkel did that, it was a real betrayal. It was a huge betrayal. I've covered this, like you. I've covered this in great detail. And Putin and Merkel's relationship was, he valued that relationship. She used that against him. She used his good feelings towards Germany, because he was stationed in East Germany when he was and she used it against him, the old Stasi agent that she is. And that's how she got him to agree to Nord Stream 2, which she knew would drive the Americans apoplectic. And she did all of this, and along with Gerhard Schroeder, to get that done, and then to betray him like that publicly after framing him into being the aggressor in Ukraine is like the last twist of the knife on her part. She shows up out of retirement to do that one last twist of the knife in order to try and get him on tilt, I think, and to try and get him to do something dumb. And the whole Ukraine war since then has been just one cheap provocation after cheap provocation to try and get Putin to do something he doesn't want to do, which is escalate this thing beyond the point of no return.
Yeah, look, he's offered peace many, many times, but Europe does not want it.
Right.
What I've been hearing from very reliable sources is that the main objective is that they think that they can take Russia, even without the United States, and that Russia has $75 trillion in natural resources.
Yep.
And then they would have that. And that's twice the national debt of the United States. And finally, Europe would rise again from the ashes, dominate the world like it used to. Yep. And the U.S. will be the subservient colonial outcast that this is why they hate Trump so much.
I know. Martin, the natural ally here is Putin and Trump. The natural alliance here is America and Russia and China carve up the world and leave Europe in the dust. That's clearly, that's why they don't want peace. So I know this is so very important, because you wrote the other day, and this was on your private blog, so you put out as much of this as you want, but you were talking about Poland. And Donald Tusk, and a man who I despise, that I watched him during the entire Brexit negotiation thing. He was horrific. And then the minute he came back to power, that was a clear EU takeover of the Polish government. Clear from my perspective. Didn't matter. The Law and Justice Party is in the back pocket of City of London, so it's not like it's not like the Poles have been sovereign forever, right? So, but talk to me about what you think is going on in Poland, and because I was flabbergasted of what I read the other day. So,
well, he's called up basically all men to report for military training. He is. They want war, and they've sent up jets, etc., because claiming that anything that from Russia to attack Ukraine that flies over their territory, they should shoot down. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, just like Poland was, 1939, the start of World War II, history has a very strange way of repeating.
Hmm.
Um, and uh, to have him out there so adamant about war, I mean, there's no interest in discussing peace. Zero. Um, the neocon playbook. Because I was in Washington back when I was dealing with the Reagan administration.
Hmm.
And what it was at that time, that's when Gorbachev, made his speech, and Reagan wanted to meet with him. And the neocons, I can tell you, they basically, before it was like they're communists. So they couldn't say that about Gorbachev anymore. So it just turned into, well, you can never trust the Russian. And Reagan rejected that and went and met. And otherwise, the Berlin Wall wouldn't have fallen. I mean, but the neocons, this is their playbook. They tell all the European leaders, do not talk to him. He's evil. So if you do not talk to the other side, then there's no possibility of a peace agreement. This is why they were so upset with Trump. How dare he talk to Putin directly?
How dare he talk to Kim Jong Un?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can watch General Flynn. He had a documentary,
Hmm.
and he basically said the same thing that I have said. That the first time Trump uh, became president, he said he was naive. Um, as you know, up to 1999, I used to be part of that vetting process. They would send me in to meet with people who wanted to run for president. The governor of Oklahoma, Ross Perot, etc. And I was supposed to tell them how the world economy really works.
Right.
But when I would get back, what do you think? Do you think he's smart enough to handle it? That was the criteria up to 99.
Hmm.
Then I was told, look, we want you to go down to meet with Bush Jr. I said, okay, fine. They said, no, but this one's different. I said, what's different? And I swear to God, they said to me, look, he's stupid. I said, what? And I said, why would you make somebody stupid president? And they said, look, he's got the name so we can win. They picked the cabinet.
Yep.
And they put in Dick Cheney. Bush didn't do any of this. I was personally asked to be the chief economic advisor in the White House. I said, no, no, thank you, not interested. All right. So I know the process. When Trump came in the first time, he did not.
Right.
Oh, you're not a politician, you're not from Washington, and we have to give confidence to the world that the government will be run properly. And they stuffed his cabinet with people with experience, all right, John Bolton, etc. All right. This is why Trump now understands how Washington works. So what did he do? He picked his cabinet before he even got to Washington. All right. That's the first time that's ever happened. All right. That was a shot across the bow. I know you people. I know what you do. I'm coming after you. Um, and so it's a subtle thing that the press isn't going to tell you, but I was there and I know both sides.
You say that, Martin, because it's funny during the campaign, again, you and I were talking before we hit record earlier about, I found myself, I've talked about this before that, I started this thing because I needed to put food on the table and figure out how to make this into something. And it's turned into this kind of community of a hive mind of its own, and has a life of its own. And I've learned over the course of time that now I'm conduit for people to pass information to. So I was getting information from the transition team going back into June, okay, about what the plans were if they won. They were well established of what they were going to do. So I was skeptical that what I heard. I'm like, okay, I'll believe it when I see it. I'm going to be very Missouri about this. Okay, show me, right? But then they show up on January 21st and they do it all. And I'm like, okay. I mean, like everything that I was told they were going to do, they did. And whether they, the stories we heard about the 19-year-olds with the laptops and Doge going in and mapping Treasury in 6 hours, whether that's nonsense or not, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a good story. They did it. And they showed up and got the receipts immediately in order to change the tenor of how things really work on Capitol Hill. Not only does, I think, to your point, that Trump understands how Washington works, he also walked in with a plan on how to dismantle how Washington works.
I mean, I went to Mar-a-Lago for dinner when he was still president in March of 2020.
Okay.
And as you know, I've met many heads of state over the years. Right. They've all been career politicians. All right. So I went to dinner there expecting more of the same. Mm-hmm. Trump actually impressed me. He said then that he wanted to pull the troops out of Afghanistan, but it was the reason. He said he was sick and tired of writing letters to their families to say your son died for God and country. And actually, to quote him, because I'll never forget this, it was burned in my mind. He said, "What are we doing there? They've been fighting over borders for 1,000 years. What difference are we going to make?" And I can tell you, being here in Florida, as you are, but I'm closer maybe to Tampa than you. Mm-hmm. There was a team. Tampa base is what oversees the Middle East. That's their criteria. Right. He set up a team there to figure out how to extract us from Afghanistan. When Biden came in, they had the whole plan ready. Biden said they were hired by Trump, fire them all, and just exited. Complete mess. It was like, whatever Trump did, we have to do the opposite. And whether it was good, bad, or indifferent, they didn't even consider it. Like him trying to sell off all the stuff for the wall that was excess. Let's get rid of it before he can use it. Just nasty stuff. And not for the country, for the people, nothing. These people don't look at it that way. This is our power base. Who are you to tell us otherwise? And I've seen this firsthand. And maybe you remember, John Bonner. He was the head of the Republicans for a while. The Tea Party got, I forget, it was 60 or 80 people that they had won.
Yep.
And when day one, whenever after the election you go there, congratulations, nice to see you. Here's how it works.
Yep.
And they tell you how you're going to have to vote. So like I tell people, look, I could vote. I could say anything you want me to hear. I'll save the whales. I won't make it rain on Thursdays or whatever you want to hear.
Right.
All right. And then I get there. That's very nice. Here's what it is. And look at the votes. They're always down party line.
Yep.
All right. The guys in the back room are the ones that decide what will the vote be. All right. The Tea Party refused to follow that. And there were enough of them that Bonner could not deliver the Republican vote.
Yep.
So what did he do? He started retaliating against anybody who was sympathetic to the Tea Party, removing them from committees.
Yep.
And I mean, that's now been outlawed with rulemaking. But I mean, this is how nasty it got. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is, I don't see much of a difference between either side. Mm-hmm. They all say, oh, yes, we want to cut government waste, but not mine. And so Trump is the first one that's actually doing something,
Yes.
and they're all beside themselves. It's like, oh, but that's my pet project, you know. I'd really like to know who came up with the idea of funding transgender opera in Colombia. You know,
Well, what's funny, and it was a point that my partner in Gold Goats and Guns, Dexter White, and I realized very quickly when we looked at the nature of the cabinet. We looked at the people. We took a snapshot of everyone. This is not a cabinet designed around getting legislative success. This is a cabinet designed around going into the executive agencies and gutting them and finding and using those wins to then leverage them for the midterms to then get the legislative success that they need and use and then bully the existing legislature into submission. And I think that was the right read because that's the way things have played out to this point. Now, we're a couple of months into the Trump administration. I'm going to tell you right now, Mr. Trump, all the flash and glitz are nice. You need to put some bodies on the table. You need to put some real wins on the table right now or within the next 3 to 4 weeks, or this moment is going to fritter away from him. I think it's a really important. We're in a very delicate time right now because they're striking back and we're seeing it at every level. Certainly over Ukraine, they're trying to turn every issue into the Trump fucked this up too, and
yeah,
no,
it's like everything's a constitutional crisis.
everything,
everything.
Trump had a Diet Coke. It's a constitutional crisis.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's the solution to Ukraine was very simple. All right, it was the Minsk agreement, and Putin even told Zelensky, "You have to honor that."
Mm-hmm.
Had they simply honored that, allowed the Donbass to vote, all right, fine.
Well, just allowed them to be in autonomous regions. That was one of the stipulations of the Minsk agreement. Was like, look, just leave them their autonomy. Just leave them their autonomy, and they'll pay taxes to Ukraine and all the rest of it.
A separate, republic. Not part of Russia, not absorbed by Russia, but they wanted to be vote on their own integrity, really.
Yeah.
And that came about because after the 2014 election in Odessa, Ukrainians hunted down any Russians, were killing them on the street, chased them into the trade union building, and then set it on fire and burned them alive. That's what sparked the whole we can't live with these people.
No, you can't. And it's what sparked the uprising in Crimea. You mentioned Oliver Stone's documentary earlier. I'll remind people that there's another one out there if you want to understand what happened in Crimea. There's a documentary called Crimea: The Way Home. I don't remember who made it. It's a Russian. I think it's a Russian film. It's excellent. And it, you can salt the taste how accurate it is, but it's very, very good, and you should be able to find it on YouTube. It may have been scrubbed, but to look for it, someone will have a copy of it somewhere.
Yeah, it's look, this thing was very clear. The same solution that just look at Yugoslavia. It broke up according to ethnic lines. Simple as that. All right. You can't force somebody to be part of somebody else or whatever, my concern with the ceasefire and knowing what Europe, I don't think can stomach a ceasefire. They need a war with Russia. And, you have Tusk in Poland. If they thought peace was possible, why is he then ordering every male to show up for military training?
Yep.
You have Australia even coming out and saying they'll send troops.
Yeah. Well, as I pointed out when we were on Capital Cosm together last week, I remind everybody, and Dexter White and I have made this point a dozen times, the Russians have no ability to project force beyond the border of Poland. because they move everything by rail, and the rest of Europe uses a different rail gauge than the old Soviet Union, than the old Soviet states. And so the trains don't fit on the tracks, and therefore the Russians don't have the logistical lift. And those they haven't proven that they have. I haven't seen them build a fleet of C-130s, like, equivalents. I haven't seen that yet. And if they start doing it, well, that's a different story, but they haven't done it yet. And so this is all nonsense. This idea that that Putin has any designs on Poland or Germany or anything along those lines. It's just nonsense. This is purely about, as you pointed out earlier, this is about the collateral to undergird a new financial system that they want to collapse the existing one, cancel the currency, cancel the debt, wipe the slate clean, and rebuild. But I think the more sinister story is the one that I've been promulgating, which is that they want the Russians in the United States to fight a war to the death so that they can be the ones to come out of the ashes stronger. And I think this current plan where they go to war is plan B, and they're really not comfortable with this plan. So I don't know. We'll see.
They come out with opposing stories all the time. You have Zelensky out there. Oh, if we fall, Russia's going to take all of Europe. And then you have NATO saying, oh, Russia's very weak and we can take it in 3 days, which is true. They basically want to constantly project, oh, Russia's going to collapse any day. You see all these stories, and they're put out by particularly ISW, Institute for Study of War, which is Victoria Nuland's sister-in-law. It's always Russia. Russia's going to be weak. We can take it. It's, why do you care? It's look, it's all about those assets, and you can look on, I think it was Face the Nation. Lindsey Graham actually said the truth for one time.
Yes, he
did.
He
said there's 10 to 12 trillion dollars in assets under Crimea, which is a gas field, and we can't allow Russia and China to get that. So this has got nothing to do with democracy. This is about assets. And it's, I put on my blog, and you can see it, I think, on YouTube. Right. General Wesley Clark, his 2007 speech. And after 9/11, he was told that they wanted to take out 5 countries, in 5 years.
Yep.
And he was like, what? And as he says the military was being transformed by this takeover of the United States by the neocons. Mm-hmm. And the military was no longer to defend the country, but to overthrow other governments. And that's what this has been about. And Trump understands that. That's why he said he was not going to have any neocons in his cabinet. And Putin understands that. Mm-hmm. Putin does know that Trump is legitimate. He does not trust Europe, and rightly so. My concern about the ceasefire is that, fine, maybe they can do it. And then what they'll do is some sort of a false flag. And just simply say, oh, Putin's evil. He violated it. Something. Yep. Just like Zelensky sent a missile into Poland and tried to pretend it was from Russia. He forgot to take off the serial numbers. You're
correct. That is the thing that's been bugging me. And the Russians rejected the ceasefire out of hand. They're like, we don't care that you're going to portray us as the bad guys here. These terms are unacceptable, and you knew they were unacceptable. Zelensky already walked back that he doesn't want to give up any territory anyway. So, in some ways, Trump is an interesting fellow. Sometimes I think he doesn't have any nuance views on anything. And then other times I say to myself, is he really crazy like a fox? Right. In that, did he allow Rubio to go over there to Jeddah and create a framework for a ceasefire so that the Europeans can all go and balls in your court, Russia. You get to be the bad guy. You get to prove to us that you're the aggressors and the bad guys again, knowing full well that these were terms that the Russians were never going to accept and that Putin doesn't care. And that Trump, and what's Trump going to do? Is he going to get angry with Putin? No, he's going to, he's going to play the game and allow them to continue to out themselves as the warmongers, because because you have to sell this politically to everybody first, right? Before you can make the big policy shift, you have to sell it politically to the people so that they understand where the real problem is. And I really do think Trump has been very clear that to him, the enemy is not the Russians. The Chinese he can negotiate a settlement with because they're actually not a problem either. They're a problem in other ways, and I don't discount Chinese ambitions geopolitically, but it's a negotiated settlement. But the Europeans are implacable; they're intractable in this because to them this is an existential threat to them. They have, as you've pointed out, they're collapsing. They have no collateral. They have no energy. They had the greatest deal in the world with the Russians, selling them gas practically below market value, almost below extraction costs. And they blew it all up over this. And it was a bad bet. And they've doubled down on it. And even if they were even if you want to make the European argument, they were forced into it by the evil Americans, right? Well, Europe, you have your way out of this now. All you have to do is say, yeah, the Americans blew up the pipeline. We'll stop bombing the Druzhba pipeline and we'll settle for peace with the Russians. And then we'll all gang up against the evil Americans. Notice how they're not doing that. It's the exact opposite of that.
No, they have their sights on the 75 trillion in assets.
Exactly.
And they are believing their own bullshit, really, that Russia's weak and that we can take them. Yeah. And what I've heard is that, well, Ukraine has caused serious damage and has substantially weakened Russia. And then the other two nonsense that I hear, one is that Putin had recalled, I don't know, it was a whole bunch of nukes because they were old, to refurbish them or something. So they use that as the excuse. Oh, his nukes are old and they won't work. So we don't have to worry about nuclear war. I said, well, okay, fine. 1 out of 1,000 does work. I mean, what happens? Yeah.
Martin, they do this stuff. It's like they write headlines whenever we move a carrier group. Like we're moving one carrier group out of a region, and we're moving the other one into the region to replace the one that's going on leave. And then what do? They write a headline: the U.S. moved 2 carrier groups into the Persian Gulf. When we all know what it's a rotation. It was the same thing with nuclear weapons. The warheads have to be refurbished and kept up. And so this is just part of the natural cycle, but it's easy to write a headline. And I got news for you. This is British propaganda, like 101. This is just classic British propaganda 101. And once you see it in one venue, you can't not see it in other venues. So it's just like they do this on purpose because they don't care. They think they can win a nuclear war with the Russians. They really do. This is Dr. Strangelove all over again.
Well, the other thing that I've heard coming from the European community is that he would never push the button because he knows it would blow back on Russia. Both Putin ways, we can take Russia. Don't worry about the nukes. Ukraine has wiped out a lot of their conventional weapons. They can't even take the Kursk region back. We got them. This is basically what I hear.
Which is insane when the Russians haven't mobilized. Well, what they've been doing is literally moving people through and training a 2 million man army through regular rotations and moving guys through the front lines. And now they have all these reserves that have combat training. Like that's what I hear. And then on the other side of it, I know you've talked about this in the past, and you said, that Putin's best strategic play would be to nuke Kiev. Well, probably, but I would put NATO Article 5 to the test. And I've said, like, no, you go to, if you're going to take care of this problem, you go to the source. The source of the problem is not Kiev. The source of the problem is in London. That's where the problem is. But unfortunately, that, and I don't want to advocate for any of this, but if Putin's best strategic plan, he's practically said it. I know where the decisions are being made. I know who's making these decisions. The Gray Zone, Kit Clarenberg at the Gray Zone in December wrote a bang up article about Project Alchemy, which is literally an offshoot. It's like Operation Gladio reworked, and it's the whole propaganda arc and story of the Ukraine war has been architected out of the bowels of MI6. And they've got them dead to rights on this, and it's literally the same script, that they ran in World War II. So I'm not, and then the Europeans are going to get what they want to, because they've always wanted the same thing. On these 2 points, on this one point alone, destroying Russia, the EU and the old British crown, neocons, whatever you want to call them, British remnant, they're in a complete agreement. Who gets to run this show afterwards, though? That's the big. Is it going to be Brussels or is it going to be London? I think there's still a fight going on there. That I think it's pretty obvious.
Oh yeah, no, it's France. France thinks that they're going to rise,
right?
Many people that I've spoken to say that Macron has this Napoleon complex, that feels that had Napoleon had won at Waterloo, that the world would be speaking French instead of English.
Right.
And even when they joined the euro, if you dig a little bit, you'll see one of the criteria for France, nobody was allowed to issue any currency that celebrated their loss at Waterloo. When they did the tunnel with the chain, the train from France to London, where did it stop in London? At Waterloo Station.
Right.
Just to piss off the French. I mean, these things have been going on for such a long time, back and forth. Right. And the idea that the EU would create this one harmony, look, I met with them and I taught how to create a currency. They didn't do it. You have to consolidate the debt, then it will be equal with the dollar. It's never been able to take out the dollar, and it can't. And economically, Europe is still using the old mercantile models from the basically the 18th and 19th century. Mm-hmm. We build stuff, we sell it to other people, and bring the gold home. If you look at the average net worth of a German, it's below that of an Italian, because they keep the taxes very high, very regulated. They're afraid of inflation from the 20s. This has suppressed Europe as a whole. Mm-hmm. So the U.S., what really makes the dollar the reserve currency is the fact, just like we were talking about, Canada has to issue debt in terms of dollars, so it can be sold. Mm-hmm. Right? The U.S. is the financial capital of the world, but it's also the largest consumer-based economy. So Mercedes, BMWs, they need America to sell them. All right. Japan needs America to sell the Toyotas. And then everybody, takes the money home. China has looked at both models, and they're copying the United States. Mm-hmm. They're trying to build a consumer-based economy, Silk Road, etc. They're not following the European model. Mm-hmm. Look, we have offices in China. We're not blocked. People from China attend our global sales. I mean, it's. I was surprised when we decided we were trying to open, because the computer says that China was going to be a rising economy. So we thought, well, maybe we should really have an office there. And our guy was setting it up, was called in by the head of the police for China. And we were like, oh my God, we were real nervous. What's going to happen?
Right.
He was probably shitting his pants,
Right.
But he went in and and the question was, oh, so Mr. Armstrong? Yes. What does he think about China? And that was it. It was like, okay.
Oh, that's
I
great.
mean, but back in '97, when you had the Asian currency crisis, um, that's when I really got to see, because I was called in by the Bank of China.
Hmm.
And I went because I wanted to go see the Chinese Wall. And everything. I said, okay, I thought I would have to listen to a bunch of bureaucrats, like in Washington or Europe, whatever.
Yeah.
And I got there, and they were all traders. And I was surprised.
Mm.
But China had sent these people out, and they worked on the dealing desks in London, New York,
Hmm.
Tokyo. Then they brought them back to run the central bank.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
so when I met with them, we're all talking about the capital flows. Oh, yes, no, we agree with you. And then I could see why they called me rather than an academic from Harvard. Um, and it was funny because when I did come back, the guys from the Treasury and the Fed called me. Oh, you were the first one to meet with the Bank of China. What was it like? And I took the knife, stuck it in their back, and I turned it. I said, very interesting. They only hire people with experience, you know, where everything else is academics. I think the Fed's got more PhDs than anything else, but at the same
Well, I was going to
time,
say, this is the point you're reminding me of one, because Jim Sinclair used to make this point when you would, all these years ago. I'd forgotten. I had something I knew, but I hadn't remembered, which is that yeah, the Chinese have taught their people how markets actually work, as opposed to how they think they work in a model. And they went out there and they traded on bond desks, and they traded on they've traded gold, they've traded oil, they've done all this stuff. So it was no shock to me when, like, for example, when the Sheafy oil contract went live, it made sense that they knew how to trade it, and it immediately, the same thing with gold, right? Their futures contracts, those markets, once they started to establish themselves as going concerns, the volume there rose rapidly, and the people traded professionally in those markets, as opposed to I mean I've worked with people like Vietnam and stuff like that. I watched those markets play. A fundamentally
Mhm.
different thing. It's like it's completely not. There's almost no 10 years ago there was nobody professional in Vietnam, but the contrast between that and when the Sheafy oil and gold contracts went live, it was like night and day.
Well, I think having, traveled the entire globe,
Right.
I would say my impression was that um, Stalin was very paranoid.
Right.
So he created this system that was very repressive. And that children were taught that the state was your parent. And if your biological parents said anything, you were to report them. Um, I had spoken to one friend from East Germany, and when the wall came down, his father went and got his Stasi file. And he came back and he thought his father went nuts. He started punching holes in the walls. What the hell's the matter? And he starts pulling out microphones, you know. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and to this day, well, his father's now died, but he would not, after that, talk to anybody but family. He found that everybody he thought was a friend was there telling the government what he said. And when I went to China, although it was communism, it wasn't the same thing.
Okay.
Stalin was afraid, I think largely that came from because Lenin was copying the United States,
Mm-hmm.
that it was communism, but all the republics were to be like the states. They were to be independent, retain their sovereignty.
Right.
Stalin, he even wrote a letter, do not let him secede me. Didn't work, but he grabs the power, and then he took all that sovereignty away. And so I think he became very oppressive because he was fighting against what Lenin's idea was,
Hmm.
independence. Um, Now, when I went to China, I didn't find the same thing. Exact opposite. I mean, they took me to one facility. Um, I was actually helping them become, capitalist, answering questions. There's one facility, they were tracking absolutely everything in the country,
Hmm.
but they were not interfering. And there were 249 varieties of tea. I never knew there really was that much.
Right.
But the questions were, why is this one tea selling for like $1 here, but like $5 there? I said, where's it come from? Well, here. I said, first you have, transportation costs. They go, oh, wow, yeah.
Right.
Okay. I
Right.
said, then somebody will pay more for this tea versus another tea if they like it more.
Right.
And I was impressed that they were creating a database monitoring all this, but
Right.
they were not interfering like Stalin would. So that's why China was able to build an economy so rapidly compared to Russia.
Hmm.
All right. The Russian people were more or less that entrepreneurship was drained out of them. Whereas in China, they knew how to be a trader right away.
Hmm.
Um, and uh, it was just, plus cycles are part of their religion.
True.
Um, what I've heard from China is they know, our computer has forecasted after 2032, they'll become the financial capital. It always moves
Right.
cyclically. It was with like Babylon, moves from Babylon to, to Athens. From Athens, it moves to Macedonia. From Macedonia, moves to Rome. In Middle
Hmm.
Ages, you have it went from northern Italy to Spain. Spain defaults, takes out all the bankers in Italy. Uh, then it moves from Spain up to, because they go after all the Jews and everything. So it moves to Holland. Holland then loses it to Britain. Britain
Right.
then loses it to us. So, I mean, it's a sequence. Everybody has their 15 minutes of fame, as Andy Warhol said, right?
Right.
Um, and China will be next. Simple as that. Even when the Byzantine Empire fell, and you have the Dark Age over here, it was India that rose to the financial capital. And then what happens? China took it from India. And that's why Columbus, when he set sail, was trying to find India because that was the land of wealth. All right, bumps into America. All right. He thought he was getting a shortcut. And he called all the Indians, American Indians, because that's where he thought he was.
Right. Well, it was funny is, and you say that, I've been, I understand, I've known your prediction on China for years, and I'm not disagreeing with it, or I can see where we're headed. This is, I think, what Trump is trying to do is not just trying to stave that off, but to try and make sure that the United States is a player in that future if then he makes the right moves now, and he has to make the right moves now. He's run out of time to not make the right move, and getting involved in a war with Russia on behalf of Europe is not the way, is not the path to that. To that's the path of destruction. That's the way I've read it. And if
I can
and when
tell
I've
you,
looked at,
I had a meeting with a Congress person who is very close to Trump, and about um, a year ago, the propaganda that they were being told was that we would be at war with China, not Russia, and the military was telling them that as well as the CIA. And I told them, I said, look, I hate to tell you, that's not true. It's basically to get you to look in the opposite direction of what they're doing. I said the real war is going to be in Europe. Oh, maybe it took about 6 months. Then I get a call. I think you're right. I said, I know I'm right. I'm telling you where my information is impeccable. They're giving you disinformation.
Right.
But that's what they were telling the Congress, that war was going to be with China, not with Russia. While
Yeah.
everything that's been going on over there was to get Russia, Russia, Russia.
Yeah.
They just didn't want them to look.
Yeah, no, and I've heard it from different people that a lot of the anti-China rhetoric is really just a matter of, look, the military-industrial complex understands those guys understand that they need to secure contracts for the next generation weapons, and if peace breaks out, we have to have another boogeyman you know, in order to secure our lines of capital for the next, or our lines of production for the next 30 or 40 years. So let's gin up this war in China. I've never, that makes sense to me. I've never really taken war with China very seriously, especially because I know that the whole point of why would we go to war with China other than over Taiwan? And Taiwan is in 10 years isn't even going to be Taiwan. Like as Trump has already pointed out, TSMC is moving 40% of its global production to the United States. And I've made the point publicly many times now. I'm like, if you look at the model of how to create crises geopolitically, you just leave these single points of failure to then you can spin up a crisis at a moment's notice with a little bit of propaganda. So why would anybody in their right mind take all of the world's chip production and put it in Taiwan unless you wanted to make Taiwan a potential source of conflict in the future? It doesn't make any sense strategically. Same thing with leaving North and South Korea the way it is, or Syria, or honestly, the divide between the United States and Canada looks to me like a classic divide and rule play. When you really back out and really stop to think about it, you're like, oh, obviously. Somebody said to me the other day, this is the last thing I'll said, wouldn't it be amazing, I said something about this trade war with Canada. I said, yeah, imagine if there was a group of people back in the 1770s who opposed the revolution. We'd still be subjects of the crown today. I said, yeah, we call them Canadians, and we all forget this.
Yeah,
So,
but Canada, there have been over the years movements back and forth to join the United States. That's why they have the Canadian dollar. They've rejected British pounds. And Quebec, when you heard about the separatists, they actually had a party and they called themselves the 51st state. Mm-hmm. They wanted to leave, several times. I mean, they even had referendums on this to separate from Canada. Then you have the West, which wanted largely rising, contention with the East, because the East, I remember back in the 80s, you probably remember when there was a big real estate speculation. Toronto was raising interest rates dramatically to stop real estate speculation in Toronto. And meanwhile, they were putting farmers and miners in the West out of business. So, that goes back to, when they created the Federal Reserve, the initial design was absolutely perfect. We had all these branches and each one was independent.
Yep.
To solve the problem of regional capital flows.
Yes.
So if there was a shortage of money in one area, they would raise the interest rate higher than the others to attract some more money to that area. Yep. And it was, the Fed was supposed to buy corporate paper, not government.
Right.
And then World War I came and the politicians said, well, we're going to have to issue a lot more debt by ours. And then they never put it back.
Nope.
And then Roosevelt, what he did was to sell his New Deal. He usurped all the power of the Fed and stuck it in Washington. So the independent branches were no longer independent. And he made it subservient to him. And when there was a revolt by the Fed in 1951. Most people don't know this.
Okay.
But during World War II, the Treasury and the White House said, we don't want interest rates going up. So it was kind of a reverse QE.
Mm-hmm.
They said, you're going to if interest rates go above this level, you're going to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
So the Fed complied for World War II to prevent interest rates from going to 10, 15%. All right. Then after World War II, they came back and said, well, we want you to do that for the Korean War. And the Fed said, enough is enough, and refused to do so. And made the press that there was this big dispute at the White House between the Federal Reserve. And I mean, they asserted their independence back then.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, we're not going to do this again. And so, I mean, that's the problem in Canada. You have this one size fits all policy that just looks at whatever the real estate is in Toronto and, oh, we should raise rates or lower rates or whatever. And they're not looking at the whole country.
No.
And you have different regional economies.
This is the interesting part about it, Marty. I know we've been going a long time now, and I don't want to take. I could do another 2 hours on this particular issue alone, and maybe we'll just because this is a really important issue to me, because I know it's a really important issue to you as well, and you finally touched on it. Maybe we'll just leave this for part 2, and we'll reconvene in
right.
6 or 8 weeks. But it's about SOFR, the repeal of the Banking Act of 1935, which created the modern Fed, and the re-regionalization of the Fed funds rate in order to just democratize and to redistribute the capital around the United States. Because I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and to me, modern California was built by the Banking Act of 1935, and how the singular Fed funds rate created a durable interest rate arbitrage and monetary advantage to build California in the same way, in many ways, the same way the euro was built, that the euro built modern Germany, or the current version of Germany that we have, because of effectively internal mercantilism. I wrote an entire article for the newsletter a couple months ago about this very thing, and I do really want to pick your brain on it, because I think that we're in that moment where I think Trump is really serious about Fed reform. As well as one of the last things that he wants to accomplish, because you can see the tea leaves if you read the tea leaves. So I think that's something that I would love to have a long way. We'll just leave all the geopolitics aside and we'll just talk monetary policy for about 90 minutes. I think it would be fun. With that said, I think I'm really appreciated this chat today. I think this has been really good. To let everybody know, and they all know who you are, but do the thing, last words out the door, and then we'll
you can always find us at armstrongeconomics.com. We keep our website free, open source. You don't have to put in emails, and we don't sell advertising. It's mainly for global, so we have clients from around the world. So we try to keep it open, so that it's freedom of information.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Martin, as always, this was a great pleasure for me. I really appreciated it, and we'll do it again soon. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. That'll about wrap it up for episode 209. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I did. So, as always, you can follow me at tomluongo.me. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728, and at Patreon at patreon.com/goldgoatsandguns. Martin Armstrong is over at armstrongeconomics.com and Strong Economics on Twitter. So with that said, I'm out. You guys be well. You take care. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.